The golden light of 3 suns painted the mountains of Novice Prime in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across James Harrison's solitary homestead. At 45, the former Earth Special Forces commander had thought he'd found peace in this remote corner of human space. His hands, calloused from years of military service and now farming, gripped the railing of his veranda as he watched an unfamiliar ship pierce the dawn sky. The vessel's design was unmistakably Viridian, elegant curves of living metal that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. James's heart quickened, memories he'd buried 15 years ago surfacing like ghosts from a forgotten grave. Only one Viridian would know to find him here, on this backwater colony world. His security system chirped a warning, but he made no move toward the pulse rifle mounted beside his door. Instead, he watched as the ship landed in his wheat field, its energy shields carefully modulated to avoid damaging the crops. A consideration that confirmed his suspicions about the pilot's identity. The ship's hull rippled, and an entrance formed from seamless metal. She emerged like a vision from his dreams, Princess Kadra of the Viridian Empire. Her skin was the color of twilight, shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that danced beneath the surface. Her hair, a cascade of silver-white strands that floated as if suspended in water, caught the morning light and scattered it like diamonds. James Harrison, she spoke his name in that melodious voice he'd never quite forgotten, her vertical pupils dilating as they adjusted to the bright sunlight. The years have been kind to you. He straightened, conscious of the gray in his beard and the scars that marked his weathered face. Your Highness. You're a long way from the Imperial Palace. Kadra, she corrected, gliding toward him with that otherworldly grace unique to her species. I've spent 15 years earning the right to be simply Kadra to you again. James fought the urge to step back as she ascended the stairs to his veranda. Up close, he could see the subtle changes time had wrought, wisdom in her iridescent eyes, an air of authority that had replaced youthful uncertainty. She'd grown into her royal heritage, yet something of the young diplomat he'd known remained. Why are you here? He asked, his voice rougher than intended. Because you made me a promise, she replied, stopping an arm's length away. The night before the Battle of Artemis Station. Do you remember? He remembered. God help him, he remembered everything about that night. We were young. It was wartime. Promises made in such moments. When this war ends, she quoted his words back to him, when we've both fulfilled our duties to our people, I'll find you again. And then we'll see if what we feel is real or just the desperation of 2 souls seeking light in the darkness. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed with emotion. Those were your words, James. He turned away, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. That was before Artemis Station. Before I led 300 soldiers to their deaths. Before I failed. Before you saved the station, the peace talks, and 10,000 civilians, she interrupted. Including me. At what cost? He whirled to face her. Do you know what they call me in the history books? The Butcher of Artemis. The man who sacrificed his entire command to stop a terrorist attack. I know what they call you. Kadra stepped closer, her scent, like starflowers and ozone, filling his senses. I also know the truth. I was there, James. I saw you make the hardest choice any commander could face. You saved more lives than were lost that day. That doesn't make it right. No, she agreed softly. But it makes it necessary. And it's why I loved you then. Why I love you still. The words hung in the air between them, delicate and dangerous as crystal. James studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation. But Kadra had never been capable of hiding her emotions, they played across her skin in patterns of light and shadow. You're the heir to an empire, he said at last. I'm a retired soldier farming wheat on the edge of nowhere. What could you possibly want with me? The same thing I wanted 15 years ago, she replied. A chance. My father is emperor now, and I've earned my right to choose my own path. I've spent these years learning about humanity, building bridges between our peoples, and searching for you. Why? Because no one, not in the imperial court, not in all my diplomatic missions, not in 15 years of searching, has ever made me feel what you did. Complete. Understood. Cherished. James closed his eyes, remembering stolen moments between strategy sessions, the way she'd challenged his assumptions about her people, how she'd shown him beauty in the midst of war. It was a different time. We were different people. Were we? Kadra's hand touched his chest, right over his heart. Or are we simply more of who we truly are? I'm still the diplomat who believes in building bridges. You're still the warrior who would sacrifice everything to protect others. Her touch sent electricity through his body, awakening feelings he'd thought long dead. What do you want from me, Kadra? Really? I want you to honor your promise, she said simply. To see if what we feel is real. No war this time, no imminent death hanging over our heads. Just us, discovering if two people from different worlds can build something lasting. And if we can't? Then we'll know, she smiled, her patterns shifting to a gentle blue. But I believe we can. I've spent 15 years preparing for this moment, studying human biology and psychology, developing treatments to extend my life to match yours, learning everything about your culture and customs. James caught her hand, holding it against his chest. You've really spent all this time planning this? Every day, she whispered. Every moment. I am a princess of the Viridian Empire, we do not love easily or lightly. When we choose for life. The morning suns had fully risen now, bathing them both in golden light. James looked at their joined hands, his tanned and scarred, hers twilight blue and luminescent. So different, yet fitting together perfectly. Stay, he found himself saying. Not forever, not yet. But stay a while. Let's see if your faith in us is justified. Her smile was like a star being born, and her patterns shifted to a deep, joyful purple. That's all I ask. A chance to prove that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how long it takes. As James led her into his home, he realized that for the first time in 15 years, the weight of Artemis Station felt a little lighter. Perhaps it was time to stop surviving in exile and start living again. And maybe, just maybe, this impossible woman from beyond the stars was exactly what he needed to find his way back to himself. Kadra sat in James's kitchen, watching him prepare what he called real coffee. Her bioluminescent patterns rippled with amusement as he went through the ritual with almost religious devotion. The domesticity of the moment struck her as both strange and wonderful. How many times had she dreamed of simple moments like this? You still haven't told me how you found me, James said, placing a steaming mug before her. I didn't exactly leave a forwarding address when I disappeared. She wrapped her hands around the mug, savoring its warmth. Do you remember Lieutenant Reeves? Marcus? James's expression darkened. He died at Artemis. No, Kadra corrected gently. He survived, though barely. I kept in touch with him during his recovery. He never blamed you, James. He understood why you had to make that call. James sank into the chair across from her, his own coffee forgotten. How many survived? 27, she said softly. Each one of them defended your decision. They knew what was at stake. The memory washed over them both like a tide. 15 years ago, Artemis Station. Alarms blared through the station's corridors as James sprinted toward the diplomatic quarter, his special forces team spread out behind him. Intelligence had confirmed their worst fears. A Nexus terrorist cell had infiltrated the station, planning to detonate a quantum device that would tear a hole in space-time. Commander Harrison. Kadra's voice crackled through his comm. The device, it's in the primary reactor chamber. But James, they've taken hostages. My father's entire diplomatic team. Hold your position, Your Highness, he ordered, even as his heart clenched at the fear in her voice. We're coming to you. The firefight that followed was chaos. The terrorists had planned well, sealing off sections of the station, forcing James to split his forces. But they hadn't counted on the determination of his soldiers, or the desperate need to prevent a catastrophe that would destroy not just the station, but the entire peace process between humans and Viridians. When James finally reached the reactor chamber, the scene before him would haunt his nightmares for years to come. The quantum device was armed, its countdown showing less than 5 minutes. The Viridian diplomats, including Kadra's father, were bound and unconscious. And Kadra herself stood defiant before the terrorist leader, her diplomatic training allowing her to keep him talking while James's teams got into position. The choice, when it came, was impossible. The reactor chamber's containment fields were failing. The only way to prevent the quantum device from achieving critical mass was to vent the entire section to space. But the override controls were in a corridor that would be exposed to hard vacuum. Sir, Lieutenant Reeves's voice was steady in his ear. Alpha and Beta teams are in position. We can reach those controls. It's a one-way trip, Marcus. We know, sir. But if we don't, everyone dies. The station, the peace talks, the princess, everything we've fought for ends here. James closed his eyes for a brief moment. Alpha, Beta teams, it's been an honor. The next few minutes were etched in fire and sacrifice. His teams fought their way to the controls, even as the terrorists realized their plan was failing. James himself led the charge into the reactor chamber, getting the diplomats to safety. But the last thing he saw before the emergency bulkheads slammed shut was Kadra's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she screamed his name. Present day. I thought you were dead, Kadra said, pulling James back to the present. When the bulkheads closed, when they vented the section. I thought I'd lost you. I almost was, he admitted. If Marcus and his team hadn't managed to reroute emergency power to the backup containment fields. He trailed off, lost in memory. Is that why you disappeared? After the medals and the commendations? James stood abruptly, moving to stare out the kitchen window at his wheat fields. How could I face anyone? I sent my people to die. I chose to sacrifice the few to save the many. It was the right call, tactically. But the cost. Kadra rose, moving to stand behind him. The cost was terrible, she agreed. But think of what was saved. The peace talks succeeded. The Viridian Empire and the Human Alliance have been allies for 15 years. Millions of lives have been made better because of what happened that day. And what about your father? James asked without turning. Does the Emperor approve of you seeking out the man who nearly got him killed? My father, Kadra said with a hint of pride, was the one who helped me find you. He never forgot what you and your soldiers sacrificed that day. He said any man willing to bear such a burden to save others was worthy of consideration. James finally turned to face her. And the nightmares? The guilt? The fact that I wake up some nights still hearing their voices? Those are part of who you are. She reached up to touch his face, her patterns glowing with compassion. They show that you care, that you remember, that you honor their sacrifice. I would not have you be any other way. Her touch was like an anchor, grounding him in the present. I'm not the same man you knew then. No, she agreed. You're more. You've carried this weight alone for so long, James. Let me help you bear it. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Why spend 15 years searching for a broken soldier? Because you're not broken, she said fiercely. You're wounded, yes. Scarred, certainly. But broken? Never. You're the man who made an impossible choice to save thousands. The man who showed me that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising again after you fall. The morning light caught in her silver-white hair, making it shimmer like stardust. James found himself studying her face, seeing both the young diplomat he'd known and the mature woman she'd become. The years had added depth to her beauty, wisdom to her grace. "I can't promise you anything," he said at last. "I'm not sure I even remember how to be close to someone anymore." "Then we'll learn together," she smiled. "After all, I've waited 15 years for this chance. What's a little more time?" As if to emphasize her point, one of the native birds of Novice Prime landed on the windowsill, its iridescent feathers matching Kadra's skin tone almost perfectly. A sign, perhaps, that even on this remote world, beauty and hope could still take root and grow. The message sphere materialized in James's living room 3 weeks after Kadra's arrival, its crystalline surface pulsing with urgent royal colors. Kadra's patterns shifted to a deep indigo of concern as she recognized her father's personal seal. "The High Council has discovered my whereabouts," she said, her fingers dancing over the sphere's surface. "They're displeased." James watched as a holographic image formed above the sphere, Emperor Thander of the Viridian Empire, his skin a deeper blue than Kadra's, patterns flowing with regal authority. Even through the projection, his presence filled the room. "Daughter," the Emperor's resonant voice carried both warmth and warning. "The Council demands your immediate return. They speak of duty, of tradition, of the need for pure bloodlines. More concerning, the astral houses have begun maneuvering. Lord Varek particularly seems intent on pressing his suit." Kadra's patterns flashed with anger. "Varek? The same Lord Varek who opposed the human alliance? Who called for war instead of peace?" "The same," Thander's expression grew grave. "He claims that your absence proves the weakness of allowing too much human influence in our culture. There are those who listen." James stood silently by the window, watching the exchange. He'd known this idyll couldn't last, the heir to an interstellar empire couldn't simply vanish with a human farmer, no matter their shared history. "Father," Kadra's voice took on the formal tones of the imperial court, "remind the council that under the laws of succession, I have the right to choose my own consort. This right was granted after the Great Sundering, when forced marriages nearly tore our empire apart. The law requires your chosen consort to be of suitable status and breeding," Thander countered. "They will argue that a human farmer, former military hero or not, does not qualify. Then they understand neither status nor breeding." Kadra's patterns blazed with conviction. "James Harrison commanded Earth's most elite special forces. He saved thousands of lives, including yours, at great personal cost. His lineage is one of service, sacrifice, and honor, qualities our empire was founded upon." James stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. "Your Highness, I won't be the cause of political instability in your empire. Perhaps it would be better if—" "No." Both Kadra and her father spoke simultaneously, sharing a look that spoke of years of understanding. "Commander Harrison," Thander addressed him directly, "my daughter spent 15 years searching for you. In that time, she reformed our diplomatic corps, strengthened our alliance with humanity, and earned the respect of both our peoples. When she finally told me of her intentions regarding you, I had you investigated thoroughly." James stiffened. "And what did you find?" "A man who bears the weight of impossible choices with dignity. Who chose exile rather than honors he felt undeserved. Who builds rather than destroys." Thander's patterns shifted to a contemplative green. "In short, exactly the kind of man our empire needs more of." "Father?" Kadra's voice held a note of hope. "I cannot officially support your choice," Thander said carefully. "The political situation is too delicate. But—" his patterns swirled with mischief, "I can ensure you have time. The laws of consideration allow a princess one standard year to evaluate a potential consort." During this time, no other suits may be formally pressed. Lord Varric won't accept that easily, Kadra warned. No, he won't, Thander agreed. Be careful, daughter. Varric's influence grows, and there are those who share his fear of human integration into our society. He turned his gaze to James. Commander, can you protect her? James met the Emperor's holographic eyes. With my life, Your Majesty. Let us hope it doesn't come to that. The Emperor's image flickered. 1 year, Kadra. Make it count. The transmission ended, leaving the room in sudden silence. Kadra sank onto the couch, her patterns swirling with complex emotions. I'm sorry, James. I never meant to drag you into imperial politics. He sat beside her, taking her hand. I'm more worried about you. You've risked everything, your position, your inheritance, your safety, just to be here. Not everything, she corrected. I've risked everything to be with you. There's a difference. She turned to face him fully. But you deserve to know what you're getting into. The astral houses are powerful, and Varric, he's dangerous in ways that aren't always obvious. James's military training kicked in, analyzing threats and formulating strategies. Tell me about him. Everything. As Kadra spoke, painting a picture of a charismatic aristocrat who cloaked his xenophobia in concerns about cultural preservation, James felt something stir inside him, something he'd thought long buried. The tactical mind that had once commanded Earth's elite forces began to wake up. He'll make his move before the year is up, James said finally. Men like that can't stand to be thwarted. He'll either try to force you to return or attempt to discredit you so badly that your choice becomes irrelevant. I know, Kadra's patterns had settled into a determined bronze. That's why we need to be ready. I didn't spend 15 years learning about humanity just to give up at the first sign of opposition. James studied her face, seeing the strength behind her ethereal beauty. You really meant it, didn't you? About choosing me, about facing whatever comes? Among my people, she said softly, love isn't just an emotion. It's a biological imperative. When we choose a mate, our very chemistry changes to align with them. It's permanent, irreversible. She touched his face. I chose you 15 years ago, James Harrison. Everything since then has just been waiting for the right moment to tell you. The weight of her words, the depth of her commitment, should have terrified him. Instead, James felt something he hadn't experienced since before Artemis Station: purpose. Here was someone worth fighting for, worth living for. Then we'll face it together, he said, pulling her close. Your politics, my demons, all of it. But Kadra? He waited until she met his eyes. No more waiting. No more holding back. If we're doing this, we do it all the way. Her smile was like dawn breaking over an alien sea. My warrior returns, she whispered, her patterns glowing with joy. I knew you were still in there somewhere. Outside, the 3 sons of Novice Prime painted the wheat fields in shades of gold and crimson, while inside, 2 beings from different worlds began planning a future that neither of them had dared to imagine possible. The warning came at dawn, transmitted through encrypted channels that James hadn't used in 15 years. His old military contacts had kept their promise to watch for unusual movements in the sector. Now, their vigilance was paying off. 3 Viridian warships just dropped out of hyperspace, he announced, studying the data streaming across his security screens. They're on an intercept course for Novice Prime. Kadra looked up from her morning meditation, her patterns shifting from serene azure to alert crimson. Varric's vessels? 2 bear House Varric's insignia, James confirmed. The 3rd. He paused, frowning at the readout. It's registered to House Drolith. House Drolith? Kadra's patterns pulsed with shock. They're supposed to be our strongest allies in the Council. Why would they, she stopped, understanding dawning across her features. Of course. The marriage alliance. James turned to her. What marriage alliance? House Drolith has a daughter of marriageable age, Kadra explained, her patterns darkening. If I'm removed from the succession, she would be next in line for consideration as imperial heir. Particularly if she were to marry Varek, James finished grimly. They're not just coming to force you home. They're coming to eliminate you as a political rival. The next hours were a blur of preparation. James might have chosen a farmer's life, but he hadn't survived countless special operations by being unprepared. Hidden caches of weapons and equipment emerged from secret compartments. Defense systems, dormant for years, hummed to life. Your ship's prepped for emergency launch, he told Kadra as they worked. If things go badly. I'm not leaving you, she interrupted, her patterns adamant. We face this together. Kadra. No, she stepped close, placing her hand over his heart. I am a princess of the Viridian Empire, and you are my chosen mate. We stand together. The first shots came just before midday. Varek's ships launched a barrage of energy weapons, clearly intended to disable rather than destroy. They wanted Kadra alive, after all. James's defensive shields, military-grade and carefully maintained, held firm. They're deploying drop ships, James noted, watching the tactical display. At least 30 troops. He smiled grimly. They think that's enough to take a retired Special Forces commander? They don't know you like I do, Kadra replied, checking the charge on her pulse pistol. The weapon looked incongruous in her elegant hands, but her grip was steady and sure. The battle that followed would later be called the Stand at Harrison's Farm by those who recorded such things. Varek's forces, expecting to find an aging soldier and a soft-handed princess, instead encountered perfectly placed defensive positions, automated security systems, and two people fighting with the strength of desperation. James moved like a ghost through his wheat fields, using the terrain he knew so intimately to deadly advantage. Each shot found its mark, each trap sprung perfectly. Beside him, Kadra proved that royal training included more than just diplomacy, her inherited spatial awareness making her a devastatingly accurate shot. But numbers began to tell. As the sun reached its zenith, they found themselves pushed back toward the house, shields weakening under sustained fire. James, Kadra's voice was tight as she fired another precise burst, the quantum communicator. We need to contact my father. They're jamming all frequencies, he replied, ducking under a plasma bolt. Even if we could, he stopped as inspiration struck. Unless. What? Your patterns, he said, gesturing to her bioluminescent skin. Your people used them for communication before technology, right? Over vast distances? Yes, but, her eyes widened. The quantum resonance. If I could attune my patterns to the quantum frequency. Can you do it? She nodded slowly. But I'll need time. And complete concentration. How long? 5 minutes. Maybe less. James checked his ammunition. You'll have it. Get to the basement lab. I'll hold them here. James, her patterns swirled with fear, not for herself, but for him. He pulled her close, kissing her fiercely. I didn't wait 15 years to find you again just to lose you now. Go. What followed was a masterclass in defensive warfare. James became a phantom, appearing and disappearing throughout the house, using every trick he'd learned in his long military career. Each time Varek's forces thought they had him cornered, he slipped away, leaving only casualties behind. In the basement, Kadra sat in perfect stillness, her patterns shifting through complex sequences. She reached out with senses humans couldn't comprehend, searching for the quantum frequencies that connected all Viridian royalty. Above, the sounds of battle grew closer. The basement door exploded inward just as Kadra's patterns erupted in brilliant light. Lord Varek himself stood in the doorway, his aristocratic features twisted with rage. "Enough of this foolishness," he snarled, raising a weapon. "You're coming home, princess, to fulfill your duty to the Empire." "My duty?" Kadra's voice resonated with power, her patterns now pulsing with a light that made Varek step back. "My duty is to strengthen the Empire. To forge bonds between peoples. To show that love knows no boundaries of species or status." "Pretty words," Varek sneered, but nothing," a new voice interrupted. James materialized from the shadows behind Varek, the muzzle of his rifle pressed against the Lord's head. "Drop the weapon. You dare threaten a Viridian noble?" Varek's patterns flashed with outrage. "I dare defend my chosen mate," James replied calmly. "Drop it." The standoff was broken by a sound that made Varek's patterns pale, the distinctive hum of Imperial warships entering atmosphere. "It seems," Kadra said with satisfaction, "that my message got through." Her pattern stabilized into a royal purple. "Lord Varek, by Imperial decree, you are under arrest for treason against the crown." As if to punctuate her words, the ceiling shook with the impact of precision weapons fire. Above, Varek's ships were being systematically disabled by the newly arrived Imperial fleet. "The Empire will never accept this," Varek spat as James secured his hands. "A human consort? It goes against everything we are." "No," Kadra corrected, rising gracefully. "It represents everything we can become. Change is coming, Lord Varek. The only question is whether you'll be remembered as one who fought against the future, or one who helped shape it." Through the basement's small window, they could see Imperial drop ships landing in the damaged wheat fields. The cavalry, as humans would say, had arrived. But looking at James and Kadra, still standing proud despite their wounds and exhaustion, it was clear that they had saved themselves long before help arrived. The imperial palace of the Viridian Empire floated among the crystal rings of Meridian Prime, its living architecture a testament to the marriage of nature and technology. In a private garden overlooking the spiral arms of the galaxy, James Harrison stood before Emperor Thander and the High Council, his formal military uniform feeling strange after years in farmer's clothes. "The charges against Lord Varek have been confirmed," the Emperor's voice carried across the assembled dignitaries. "His conspiracy with House Drolith to alter the imperial succession through force has been proven beyond doubt." His patterns shifted to indicate formal judgment. "Their properties and titles are forfeit, their houses dissolved." James remained at attention, aware of the hundreds of eyes upon him, some curious, some hostile, some calculating. Beside him, Kadra stood resplendent in her royal regalia, her patterns glowing with quiet confidence. "However," Thander continued, "these events have forced us to confront larger questions. Questions of tradition versus progress, of isolation versus integration." He turned to face the council directly. "My daughter's choice of consort has been challenged on grounds of species and status. The law of succession requires me to address these challenges formally." A murmur ran through the assembled nobles, their patterns creating a rippling aurora of anticipation. James kept his face neutral, though his heart raced. Everything they'd fought for would be decided here. "Commander James Harrison," Thander's voice took on the formal tones of imperial proclamation, "step forward." James moved with military precision, feeling Kadra's supportive presence behind him. "You stand accused of being unsuitable as a royal consort due to your human heritage and common birth. How do you answer these charges?" James spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the garden. "Your Majesty, I make no apology for what I am. I am human, yes. I was born to farmers on earth, not nobles in a floating palace. But I have served with honor, protected the innocent, and loved your daughter with everything I am." He paused, looking directly at the Emperor. The Viridian Empire was founded on principles of evolution and adaptation. Your people achieved spaceflight by embracing change, not fearing it. The alliance between our peoples has brought prosperity and peace to both sides. Perhaps it's time for another step forward. Pretty words, a counselor interrupted, his patterns showing skepticism. But the royal bloodline is strengthened by diversity. Kadra stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. Our own histories show that periods of isolation led to stagnation, while embracing outside influences brought renaissance. The human capacity for innovation, their adaptability, their determination, these are qualities our empire needs. She took James's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. Look at what we accomplished together. When Varek attacked, it wasn't pure Viridian tactics or pure human strategy that won the day. It was both. Together, we were stronger than either of us alone. And the biological concerns? Another counselor asked. The differences in lifespan, in physiology? Already addressed, a new voice spoke. A Viridian scientist stepped forward, her research patterns bright with excitement. Princess Kadra commissioned our work 15 years ago. We've developed treatments to extend human lifespan to match our own. The physiological adaptations have been solved. Any children would be viable, carrying the best traits of both species. James turned to Kadra in surprise. She smiled, squeezing his hand. I told you I spent those years preparing. I left nothing to chance. Emperor Thander raised his hand for silence as debate began to break out among the counselors. His patterns shifted through complex royal harmonics before settling into a decisive configuration. The challenges have been heard and answered, he proclaimed. Commander Harrison's actions in defense of my daughter, his service record, and his demonstrated character speak to his status. His humanity. The Emperor's patterns rippled with what could only be described as amusement, may prove to be his greatest strength rather than a weakness. He spread his arms wide, his patterns blazing with imperial authority. Let it be known throughout the Empire, the union between Princess Kadra and Commander James Harrison is sanctioned by the Crown. Their children will be legitimate heirs to the throne. Let this mark the beginning of a new era of true cooperation between our peoples. The garden erupted in a display of pattern light as the nobles responded, some with joy, others with resignation, but none with open hostility. Change had come to the empire, and they would adapt as they always had. Later, in a quiet moment alone in Kadra's private chambers, James held her close as they watched the galaxy spin beneath them. 15 years, he murmured into her hair. You planned all of this for 15 years. Not all of it, she replied, her patterns glowing with contentment. I couldn't have planned for Varek's attack, or for how perfectly we'd work together, or for the way the council would respond to seeing us stand united. She turned in his arms to face him. I just knew what I wanted and refused to settle for less. And now? What does the future hold for an ex-soldier and his alien princess? Her patterns shifted to show deep love tinged with excitement. Everything, James. The Empire needs to change, to grow. Who better to help guide that change than two people who understand both worlds? Together, we can build bridges between stars. James thought of his quiet farm on Novice Prime, of the peace he'd found there. But he also thought of the thrill of standing beside Kadra, of fighting for something bigger than himself, of making a difference again. Together, he agreed, pulling her closer. Though I'm keeping the farm. Everyone needs a place to retreat when palace life gets too overwhelming. Our sanctuary among the wheat fields, she smiled, her patterns synchronizing with his heartbeat. Where a princess found her warrior, and a soldier remembered how to live. Above them, the crystal rings of Meridian Prime caught the light of distant suns, creating rainbow bridges across the sky. Below, in the sprawling cities that floated among the stars, humans and Viridians went about their lives together, perhaps not even realizing that their future had just been quietly reshaped in a palace garden. And in that quiet chamber, two beings from different worlds held each other close, their love a testament to the simple truth that the heart knows no boundaries, not of space, not of time, and certainly not of species. Their story would be told for generations, not just as a romance, but as the moment when the future itself changed course, guided by the unlikely pair who dared to reach across the stars to find each other.